Hello and welcome to the New Thought Men's Podcast, where we explore what it is to be a healthy spiritual man today. I'm Eamon. It's great to have you with us. So welcome to the New Thought Men's Podcast. I am Eamon. Today we are here with Jim Lockard. Jim, thank you so much for being with us today. It's exciting to have you here speaking about the beloved community and masculinity.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. So let me just share a little bit about you for those people who aren't too familiar with you. Dr. Jim Lockard is a teacher, speaker, author, blogger, coach, consultant, ordained minister, and New Thought leader. He's currently living in Lyon, France with his wife, and they are frequent presenters at international conferences in spirituality, business, and academic fields. Jim was a keynote speaker at the Unity Convention in 2023 and will speak at the Associated New Thought Network Conference in 2024. I'm going to be there. Look forward to seeing you there. And for 20 years, Jim served as a spiritual leader at the Centers for Spiritual Living in California, Florida, and Maryland. He is also a prolific author of Being the Beloved Community, Creating the Beloved Community, Sacred Thinking, and his regular blog, The New Thought Evolutionary, is very popular in New Thought circles and beyond into the world. So that's a little bit about Jim. And Jim, we just enjoyed your sharing for the summit and speaking on a lot of different topics. And so I'm excited to kind of delve into some of that. And I think a great starting place is just how, confusing it is to be a man these days, like societally. And we see this confusion, I think, especially prominent in younger men. And like when I look at YouTube videos or stuff like that, it's just, it's so hard, I think, to see the challenges and the old models that are showing up of guys being guys, but also there's this other piece where there's tender, men and kind men showing up as well. I think in these times of change, where the old models aren't really gone, and I don't know if that they'll ever be gone per se, but we're moving into these new models, and specifically in times of change like this, how do we as men and especially maybe just some thoughts for young men and how they navigate these times of confusion and change right now?
Yeah. Well, I think to some degree it's always been a bit of a challenge depending upon whether or not who you showed up as in terms of this incarnation on the planet, whenever it happened, how that fit in with whatever was going on in terms of society's expectations. Certainly when I was born in 1951, so I was a kid in the 50s. I was a teenager in the 60s and a young adult in the 70s. And if I'd have been anything other than a straight male, I'd have really had a difficult time. And I probably most of the people that I knew at that time, who I later discovered were gay, because that's pretty much, we hadn't even gotten into the idea of trans and other expressions back in that time. I didn't know they were gay until they came out in their later adulthood. And in my center in Fort Lauderdale, when I was a minister there, we had a very vibrant support group of children of gay parents who were adults, and their parent their parents had had gotten married in a traditional heterosexual kind of a relationship, and then later come out as gay. And the support group was to help the children of those marriages deal with that in terms of all the stuff that was going on in the culture at that time. When I look at my children, who are millennials, they seem to be much more comfortable with sort of the lack of exacting definition, and more open to people being different. But at the same time, they have their own ways of being cruel to one another and their own set of expectations, and different parents have different sets of expectations. So my point is, I think it's gotten more difficult today simply because of the greater complexity involved. We're looking at more kinds of outcomes. We're looking at more possible ways to be. And we're looking at a movement away from sort of a small number of ideal role models to follow for any gender or for any kind of expression. Young men, especially, I think, today are confused because they're getting so many different messages. And a lot of it is from, the traditional sources of Hollywood and television, where, it used to be there were people in movies and people on TV that weren't incredibly good looking. That doesn't seem to be the case very often these days, unless that's a specific purpose. If you go back and look at some of the older movies, even the people that were the beautiful movie stars, their teeth weren't straight, and they weren't quite as groomed and nipped and tucked to the point that they are today. So just that's one little slice of sets of expectations that are so much more difficult to manage. The women have always had the body image issues because of the way things have been presented in advertising and so forth. But it's also true increasingly for men today. And also for young men, you have these young men that have been identified, the term they use is incels. And these tend to be, back in my day, these would have been loner kids that didn't have good social skills, that probably were shunned or didn't get to be with the groups of kids and the various identities and so forth. And the difference today is that they're connecting online, and they're often being radicalized. I think you'll find that the shooter over the weekend of President Trump that happened recently would fall into that category. Just these kids that are now, if I'm bullied, I realize there's something wrong with that, but I have very few avenues to do anything about it. So maybe I become radicalized. I get online and I see videos and I watch people like Joe Rogan and things like that. And all of a sudden, here's what I need to do. My role models are people that are very destructive. So you've got that piece. You've also got the piece about gender. It's not a binary anymore, although it isn't to many people, it is. But what we're seeing a movement toward is a more complex understanding of gender that can show up in a whole range of expression. And the society hasn't come to terms with that. And it also hasn't created structures and mores that are clear, that are also empowering. So if you are, I have a good friend here in France who has a son who is transgendered to male. And it's really unclear in the French system. The other kids are fine, basically, but the teachers and so forth don't quite know what to do. And there isn't, the French language is very masculine, feminine. So if there's something in the middle, it doesn't exist. You can't, even a washing machine has a gender here. So, how does society come to terms with these kinds of things? And often there's a big pushback, which you're seeing in American politics. The whole Project 2025 is pushback against the progressive changes of the last century or more that have really been about accepting the reality of how people express to a greater degree than we used to. But it hasn't been a peaceful process. It hasn't been an easy process. And I don't think it's going to become easy or peaceful for some time. So if I'm coming of age in the now or in the next decade or so, there's going to be some struggles involved. And if I live in certain parts of the U.S., there's going to be big struggles.
Mm.
So we see things like self-harm and suicide and people dropping out and going into, going into the sex trade in some ways because they can't find another way forward.
Mm.
And it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So I think our response through a program like this is to say, let's identify some of the healthy ways forward and let's make space for people that are in those struggles so that they have a place to come or at least for some period of time or part of the week or through relationships, they can feel accepted and they can have a chance to be at peace and to develop some intention about how they want to go forward. I think that's really a big purpose of spiritual community today.
Yeah, I feel like we're working towards the whole man perspective, or really the whole person perspective, right? In the sense of that those old role models, those two that you talked about, kind of that John Wayne, I'm a tough guy, the great Santini, a great persona for Robert Duvall, in just what that unhealthy older masculinity looks like, in being able to move into this new understanding of, yes, what is it to be a whole man? What is it to have and acknowledge that we have emotions as well? Like as if, we don't have emotions, like it's almost like years ago, I don't have emotions. Like you said, anger was the only acceptable emotion. And for us to now be able to step into that and say, yes, as a whole human being, we have these feeling systems, we have this intellectual system, we have this heart, this body system that tells us, oh, I'm feeling this. I can accept who I am, even though maybe that feeling part of us has been pushed down since we were 3 or 6 or 8 years old. And we're told to repress it on so many levels by society and in this way and that. And so when we get to those moments of being aware of our woundedness as men, as you put it, and getting radically self-honest to be able to say, yes, okay, what would it be like if I actually could express these emotions or be okay having these emotions, maybe to start with? And then what are they trying to tell me? Because obviously in our New Thought philosophy, we believe that the universe is communicating to us, right? Whether it's through our body, whether it's through our minds, whether it's through our experience, whether through it's our outer world, we're being communicated to for that greater good, for that greater understanding and evolution and clarity of who we are and what we're here for on some level. And to be that whole person, to be able to accept ourselves on those so many levels, the beautiful parts and also the challenging and the struggle parts, and there's plenty of those these days, it seems. But to finally choose, like our philosophy says, to choose, who am I? What am I here for? Do I choose to be optimistic? Do I choose to be positive, even in those moments where it seems hopeless and I can't see a way out? For me, I've been in those moments. I was suicidal when I was a kid. I'm a neurodiverse person. My brain has fun with letters and numbers. And so I did not do well in school. And it pushed me to the point of really that place of struggle of, why am I here? What do I want to be here for? And to be able to grow, fortunately, out of that, and having people in my life who supported me through that, but to grow into this idea that I'm not broken. I am, this is an aspect that allows me to see the world from a different perspective, and experience the world in a different way. And to accept myself as a whole man with these unique and diverse and crazy things that I have going on, as we all do on some levels. So I just wanted to get your take on a little bit of that.
I'm reminded of a quote from Ken Keyes, who wrote a wonderful book called The Handbook to Higher Consciousness back in the 80s, 70s or 80s. And I used to teach a course on it every summer. And one of the lines in there that I think about probably every day is, he said, all human expression is the expression of love. He said, some of it's skillful and some of it's unskillful. So it's sort of, if you imagine pulling back into a sense that it's all love, the energy of spirit expressing as anything that's going on in the universe can be defined as love. And we are basically conduits for the expression of it. Somehow, we take potential and process it through our mind and our being, and we actualize it. And that potential doesn't care what it becomes. That energy of spirit, let's say, or the energy of the universe will become whatever. It doesn't care. Atoms will become part of a body or part of a lamp or part of a planet or just float through space. They don't care. So if I look at myself as being a part of this expression designed to actualize potential into human experience, wouldn't I want to do that skillfully? Wouldn't I? And when I don't, I could say, well, that wasn't very skillful. Let me do something different, as opposed to beating myself up or declaring myself a victim or whatever. What if we gave ourselves permission to forgive ourselves when we're off the mark? The meaning of sin is to miss the mark. And when I miss the mark, which we all will every day in some way, you say, what if you develop a sense of being able to laugh at yourself a bit, and make amends if you need to make amends because you've harmed someone else. But then you go ahead and say, oh, silly me, I'm in my shadow again, which we'll get to in a minute. I'm in my dark place. Let me make an adjustment, as opposed to, there I go again and beating myself up and just making myself dig deeper into that sense of disconnection. I can't be disconnected. That's what New Thought says. There's only one thing happening. It's spirit, the creative intelligence of the universe, creating out of itself and becoming that which it creates. So if that's what's going on, everything I express must be divine, must be love. But I can mangle it up. I can screw it up. I can constrict it, or I can aim it in the wrong place. I have that capacity. It's like if I have a hose and I point it at you and get you wet, the water didn't have anything to do with that. The water would have gone wherever I pointed the hose. It didn't care. So the potential that we have access to doesn't care what it becomes. It can become a human being like Hitler, or it become a human being like Mother Teresa. It's the same energy. It's like the electricity in your house, right? It can run the air conditioner, it can run the computer, or you can use it to run the electric chair. The electricity doesn't know and doesn't care. So how do I get comfortable with that idea and free myself of the need to be in recrimination about anything that doesn't go perfectly? Marion Woodman, one of her quotes I used in the presentation, she wrote a book called Addiction to Perfection. That is really a critical thing for people to understand, and it has to do with shadow. So our shadow self is anything about ourselves that we've repressed because it didn't work, or it didn't appear to work, or it wasn't accepted. So when you're a little kid, you do stuff, right? You act out. You say, oh, look, you get excited. You run around. You take somebody else's toy. And for some of those behaviors, you get a smack on the hand, or you get put in a timeout chair, or you get yelled at. And you don't have the psychological sophistication to figure out what's the meaning of that. So you repress it. You push it down into your psyche. But it's out of your awareness, but it's part of your consciousness. That is part of your filtering system of how we perceive the world. So quick example. Very easy example. Let's say when you're a little kid, which most of us do, we take things that don't belong to us, right? Somebody else's toy, or you take some money out of your mom's purse. Because initially you don't know. Private property isn't something we're born understanding, right? But you get punished. You can't do that. That's bad, right? So you say, I can't be a thief. So instead of saying, okay, I'll be a good person, you say, I can't be a thief, I can't be a thief, I can't be a thief. So then you start projecting that out onto other people. And when somebody steals something, you get furious, you see, because they're reminding you of a part of yourself that you have denied healing for. So the psyche, our soul wants us to heal all the time. It's continuously trying to get us to look at the stuff we don't want to look at so we can heal it. But we're conditioned, and society supports us in keeping it hidden. Right? So when you do shadow work, which is radical self-honesty, you begin to look for cues as to where you've hidden this in the subconscious, and the cues are excessive emotional reactions. So whatever I get really angry at, or whatever I get really irritated at, is always a shadow issue. It's something, doesn't mean the person I'm irritated with isn't being irritated. But the reason I'm responding in an irritated way is because of my own shadow response. So this is 99.9% of all human dysfunction. It's stuff we've repressed that we project onto others. They mirror it back to us and we get upset. Or it's positive stuff that we've repressed. Like maybe it wasn't safe to be intelligent in your house when you were a kid, right? So we grow up and we project that onto other people, and we find somebody really intelligent, we fall in love with them, or we worship them, or we make them a celebrity. See, so there's the golden shadow, which is the good parts of ourselves that we don't have access to, but we project it onto others, and they remind us it's us. But if we're not aware of how that process works, we don't heal it because we just think it's them, not us. So whatever you would do, any people you really, really, really respect or really, really, really like, that's your own qualities you're seeing in them that they're mirroring back to you. Which is why the same person can be respected and hated by different people, because we're projecting different things onto them. See? So this is such an important part, because so much of what we repress has to do with gender identity, has to do with sexuality, has to do with masculinity and femininity. Because your family probably had some strict rules about how those things showed up or were forbidden. So a lot of the shadow we form as young children is around those areas. And then until we can come to terms with them and recognize them in ourselves, we can't really heal.
That's the deep inner work that we're called to do as men. You know, I think it's important that we really honor who we are and what we're here for on like that soul level of like growth of what we're doing, of what we're called to do, especially us in New Thought, where this philosophy says you can be who you want to be. You can become. Change your thinking, change your life, is what Ernest Holmes used to always say. So how do you know, I mean, I've done men's work for 30 plus years, so I have done a bit of shadow work, and there's always more to do. I think it's always good to really understand that, and that it's that spiral upwards, that we get to learn more and more about ourselves, and the more that's revealed, the more that we get to be conscious and choose and say, yeah, I'm going to show up like this. I'm going to show up in this way. I'm going to show up as the person that I want to be in the world, as best as I can, being a human being, having all of our flaws, all of these challenges, all of the shadow, all of the experiences that we've had that we can sometimes struggle with. I mean, I grew up, or I was raised, let me put it that way. I was raised Catholic. And so there were a lot of stigmas with that. There were a lot of yeses and nos, a lot of blacks and whites. of this is right, this is wrong, and to be able to go through and heal those things, to be able to go through and work on those things, and seeing them coming back around and back around oftentimes, and being able to do that work. Oh, okay, that one's coming back around again. Let me do that. Let me continue to work on that. I personally, I love this work because it is, when we deal with those parts that we're expending so much energy repressing and keeping down, that we heal that, at least even to a certain extent, we're freeing that energy up to then pursue the fullness of that which we are, the whole experience of that which we are, the goals, the dreams, to be able to allow the energy to flow into our brilliance and our genius and our luminosity.
Yeah. Well put. And it's the idea of coming to terms with the reality of our empowerment, and then doing the work to make sure that we're in great clarity about what that is, because it's easy to fall into a victim consciousness. It's easier to say, look what they're doing to me. Yeah. And that's a challenge. And the other thing that's easy to do is to do spiritual practices without doing the deeper work. And that becomes spiritual bypass in effect, because until I'm willing to look at the deeper issue that may be the really deep wound, I'm not going to be able to pray about it, because I won't even let myself know it's an issue. You see, it's subconscious until we bring it to the conscious level. Carl Jung said something to the effect of, people will do amazing things to avoid looking at their own souls. And he also said, you don't become enlightened by looking at the light, you become enlightened by revealing what's in the darkness. And that's a hard thing, because people always fall back in our side of the aisle with Ernest Holmes. Well, he said the world has learned enough through suffering. And he did say that, but there are some things that can't be revealed unless there's some pain involved. And it only becomes suffering when you don't heal it. Yeah. You see, there's pain, which is part of the deal, part of life, because change is painful. Or at least it's uncomfortable, right? But if you stay in that state of discomfort for a long period of time, then you're suffering. Suffering's optional. Pain is part of the deal. And that's part of being the healthy male. It's not to John Wayne through the pain, but to really sit with the pain and say, what does this have to tell me? So I don't have to sit with it again. And it's hard when we're in the midst of that, especially if you've been affected severely by trauma and so forth. That sort of puts more of that shell around yourself, that it's so dangerous to go inside, to really get to the depth. And I think that's when we need to work with someone like a good therapist or something. I went to therapists a number of times in my life to help me break through some of the things that was my own resistance, because I was too afraid it would hurt too much. And what I found was, when I did break through, it hurt like hell, but then I could heal it. And it was like, it's sort of like putting on glasses for the first time. All of a sudden, I didn't need to be seeing badly all along. I could have seen good sooner if I'd have done the work sooner. But you don't beat yourself up for that either. Whenever the healing comes, the healing comes. But the healing's not going to come by trying to pray away something you're unwilling to look at. Yeah. And that's one of the tough lessons in life.
I think the importance of, in exactly what you're saying, is getting the help that you need. And for us as men, that's been shunned for so long. And I'm glad that, nowadays it seems like people are having normal conversations about getting help and having help. The statistics we see, Richard Reeves is amazing at this, just the statistics on what's going on with men and young men right now, the suicide rates, all of this, the loneliness epidemic. And it's not just men, it's women as well. Yeah. But we seem to be at the height of that. for us right now. And so I think just not only finding a person, but finding community, finding connection. I think that's the thing that I love about this new thought philosophy, and surrounding myself with all of these like-minded people like yourself that I get to hang out with. I get to be in my community, that I get to be in a men's group with, or sit down with, to have that support around me where I'm actually genuinely heard and listened to, that I'm not feeling so alone. I think you spoke about the challenges of just being a young person and exploring who you are these days, is just I think it's a beautiful opportunity, and we see lots of young people exploring that. And also, there's a lot of shame around it. There's a lot of still society that wants to stay in those stereotypes, in those societal norms, and to not break out into the larger context of who we are and who we can be. So yeah, I think, again, back to that whole person experience, the denial of the parts and pieces, the unconscious biases that don't allow us to see, how we're experiencing the world in some degrees.
Well, I agree. I from one piece you said is get thee to a men's group. You know, and if there isn't one there, make one, because even if there's not a professional therapist in the group, which usually there isn't, it's therapeutic to just be able to sit with men and speak the truth. A sharing circle, something very simple that can mean so much. When I was at the center in Westlake, California, and then in Simi, which are very close together, there were a group of us, from some people from both of those communities, and I was one of, there were about 7 or 8 of us, and about every 4 weeks we'd have a poker game. We have a man dinner and poker game, and we had somebody's house, and they'd come over, and the host was in charge of the food, and we'd play you only could bring 2 rolls of quarters, so it was a very friendly poker game, but we would connect and we would talk about stuff and we would joke and we would, there was that male connection. And that led to other conversations by different people in the group. If I had a problem, I'm going to go to one of those guys, and same vice versa. And that was just so important. And I find, and again, this is a generalization, and so it's not 100% true ever, but I do find that women tend to be, in general, better at that kind of social skill than men, for a variety of reasons. Most of it's socialization. When men are together, we're supposed to be playing sports and playing grab ass and insulting each other and stuff like that.
In competition.
Yeah, exactly. But when you get past that, when you get to the place where you can maybe just be relaxed and be joyful together, it's so empowering, and it carries over in the feeling tone of how you're living your life into other parts of your life, where you're not always feeling a competitive thing. When you see another man, you're kind of like, oh, maybe you can have a conversation, and maybe you start having deeper conversations with people in other parts of your life, at work or the neighbors or whatever. And that's growth. That's being able to get into a place where you're comfortable in your own skin, without feeling like you're being judged by everybody that's looking at you. But you're really just being judged by yourself, and you figure, I've already decided years ago that I can never live up to it, so why should I try now? That's a very common kind of a thing. So getting past that and just saying, what, other people's opinions of me are none of my business. I will take note. I will listen to criticism, but I let my healthy self take it under advisement. And if I don't think it's valid, I forget it. That kind of thing. And that takes, for me, that took years of work to be able to get to that place. Because I wasn't raised or conditioned that way.
Yeah. I think it allows us to show up, and the work, I feel like there's almost generational work that's been done in some respects, through the generations that are current, the newest generations are just like, I mean, I notice these young men who will just hug each other, and that's just a part of it. And it took me it took me literally a year to finally get my dad to feel comfortable hugging me and telling me that he loved me. It took a year of working at that. And so to see that so much more easily these days, and for these young men to be interacting and supporting each other to a certain extent, without structure, imagine what that looks like with structure, and especially in our groups with spiritual structure, to have that support of, hey, what we believe, we hold the higher vision for you. When we're witnessing, someone speak, when we're listening to their story, when we're able to go, oh, I hear you, I see you, and I hold this higher vision for you as well. The things that I love about our philosophy, for sure.
Well, to give you some idea, that just a quick thing about socialization. So I'm here in France, right? And you'll see young people, high schoolers or university students or people that are, just not in school or anything, some tough looking people. And a group of guys will come up and meet another group of guys, and they all kiss each other on the cheek twice. It's automatic. I mean, it's like that's what socialization did for them, as opposed to making some kind of contact like that taboo or verboten.
Yeah.
And it was interesting during COVID when the government tried to get people to stop doing, they're called beeses, the kisses, when the government tried to get people to stop doing it. And it did, when you're in the mask and everything, but now it's all back and everybody does it again. And of course, COVID's going up again, but what are you going to do? But that's such a part of the culture here. And you see we'll be walking around, you see the, 2 or 3 fairly tough looking kids with tattoos and everything, and they'll go up and kiss each other on the cheek. It's fascinating,
Beautiful. Well, thank you for spending so much time with us. I just have one closing question that I'd love to have you answer. What does healthy masculinity look like in the 21st century? How do we move into that? Just a small question.
Just a small question. Well, I think what it looks like is being comfortable in your own skin, including having a sense of vulnerability and humility. Now, humility to me means truth. If I'm being humble, I'm being truthful. It also means having a capacity for compassion, which to me is the ultimate expression of truth, because compassion is, you and I are the same, and I'm going to express to you what I believe in my heart is the best thing for you. It might be tough love. It might be something you don't want to hear. It might be enabling you to do something you want to do. Compassion can run the gamut of appearance. But having those capacities, because I know who I am and I'm comfortable with who I am, imperfections and all. Therefore, I don't need to defend myself from you. I don't need to manipulate you into thinking about or treating me a certain way. So all these things that we tend to do that are defensiveness out of insecurity, a healthy masculine or a healthy feminine doesn't have that degree of insecurity. And which also includes the recognition that everybody's not going to like you, or some people are going to think you're crazy, or some people are going to not want to associate with you. And that's okay too. But it's when that's not okay that we get into trouble. And we begin to draw the lines and build fences and the other things we do to out of ego defense. So that's what now how we get there is to model it, find people that have developed it, ask them to mentor you or work with you or get them connected with some younger person that they can spend time with. It's a combination of one-on-one at the spiritual community. Make that part of the conversation. These things can happen. I think these things can happen more quickly than we think they can because they're part of our actual nature.
Yeah. Support,
when we
push.
can, because we recognize them. It
Mm,
may seem alien initially, but when we take it out for a test drive, it fits. And therefore we're more likely to adopt it more quickly, because there's not going to be that inner negativity toward it, because the inner intuitive knowing is going to say, yes, sweetheart, this is who you've always been, you know.
yeah, and that's what, having role models, having mentors, having support from other men allow that equalization process, or that equilibrium process within ourselves, I think, to happen more quickly, and probably more authentically, probably more gently on some levels, at least in my experience.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
You
Jim,
know,
thank you so. Oh, go ahead.
no, I just would say, when life doesn't have to be a struggle,
Mm,
it works much better.
right. I hear that. I'm embracing that more and more. Let me put it that way. Jim, thank you so much for your
Uh,
time today. Thank you for being such a beautiful elder in our community and supporting this kind of work and this kind of consciousness in our community, in our in our world, just by
Thank
being
you.
out there and being who you are. So thanks so much. I look forward to other conversations in the future. And thanks for being with us today.
Definitely. Thank you very much for the work you're doing. I think it's really important.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this interview from the New Thought Men's podcast. For instant access to all podcast interviews, talks from our summit, men's groups, and so much more, join us at newthoughtmens.community. Thanks so much for being with us today. There's more to come, so stay tuned in.